What else I have? This coming Thursday, November 17th, is going to be the 30th anniversary of the death of Audre Lorde. Yeah, so two quick quotations from Audre before I introduce our guests. One, you've all heard before, I know, your silence will not protect you. When we speak, we're afraid our words will not be heard or welcomed, but when we are silent, we're still afraid, so it's better to speak. And a second quotation from Audre, caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it's self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare. One of the things I always appreciate so much about Audre Lorde is she pulls no punches. You know where she stands at all times on all things. We're so fortunate to have Janaka Bowman Lewis returning to us today. Our topic today is on reading Black girlhood in community. We have our own LaCoya Katoe Gessesse, AULA faculty, oversees the independent studies and focuses on academic writing. And as I said, returning for her second visit to Messy Conversations, Janaka Bowman Lewis, who's the director for the Center for the Study of the New South at University of North Carolina, Charlotte. She's the author of the 2017 book, Freedom Narratives of African-American Women. She's also written a number of children's books. And the reason we're having her back today, besides the fact that we just like to be in conversation with her, is that she's got a new book coming out next year, Light and Legacies, Stories of Black Girlhood and Liberation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to LaCoya. One more quick thing. Please, if you have questions or comments or anything you want to share, put it in the chat and we'll get to it. Take it away, LaCoya.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am delighted to be here both professionally and personally because Janaka is my sister. And so it's always nice to just share this space with her and get some kid-free time with her. I'm looking forward
even if they're just in the other room.
in the background. Looking forward to seeing her in the flesh in 2023. It's been way, way too long. So again, thank you for joining us. And Janaka's book, Light and Legacies, Black Girlhood and Stories of Liberation, is going to expand on how we offer or further examine the creative lives and practices of Black girlhood. She's going to look at Black women writers who examine the interiority of Black girlhood, the sweetness of their joy, the passion of their desires for expression, and at times they're misread. I was going to say at times being misread as having like tempers and angers and frustrations. And she's going to offer some much ignored insight into Black girlhood in that manner. Look at some ignored representation. She's going to explore some of our favorites: Toni Morrison, Toni Cade, Nikki G, Alice Walker, some names that we should know if we don't, and then also look at some personal narratives of some other people, some other Black women writers. It's fitting to be here with Janaka because much of I feel like the beginning of our relationship was all about Black women's literature and sharing that at the time with Black and brown girls on the South and West sides of Chicago and exposing them to not only those amazing writers, but to the ability to tell their own stories. Many of whom did not have outlets to do so. So we were teaching poem writing. without worrying about the mechanics. We were teaching storytelling without worrying about punctuation. Those young ladies were living some really challenging lives, and we hope, I think we did this, gave them writing as a tool to process some of that. So it's a pleasure to be here with you, my friend. And I'm going to start off, if you don't mind, reading from this book, My House by Nikki Giovanni. This is the original copy that was given to me by my paternal grandmother when I was about 10. And many years ago, I went to a conference and Nikki was speaking and had the courage, I was so nervous, had the courage to go up and tell her the story of my grandmother giving me this book. And she signed it for me. So anyway, I love this. And it's the original. So it's like old, and I'm just so happy about it. But there's a poem in here that I think really goes with this work, and it's called Legacies. And I'll just read that for a second and then talk about myself and then let Janaka take it away. So Legacies. Her grandmother called her from the playground. Yes, ma'am. I want you to learn how to make rolls, said the old woman proudly. But the little girl didn't want to learn how because she knew even if she couldn't say it, that would mean when the old one died, she would be less dependent on her spirit. So she said, I don't want to know how to make no rolls, with her lips poked out. And the old woman wiped her hands on her apron saying, Lord, these children. And neither of them ever said what that meant. And I guess nobody ever does. And I love this poem because as a daughter of a mom who has 4 sisters, so I had 4 powerful, powerful auntie figures in my life. I had both of my grandparents for 35 plus years in my life, both of whom were active until the end. And then even had a great grandmother who was present in my life until I was about 10. So I have vivid memories of her as well. And so while there are some men in the mix, I spent much of my time watching these women buzz about, yes, in domestic work, in the kitchen, in child rearing, but I think buzz about in just mighty, powerful ways. And I mean buzz about as in they ran the show. They dictated, down. They dictated, sorry, someone's trying to compete with me on the TV.
Speaking of running the show.
Down or off, buddy. Thank you. Sorry. I was thinking that they ran the show in these powerful ways. They set the tone, not only in that world of domestic stuff, but also just they were the heart, the soul, the spirit of our families. And I was obsessed with watching them as a girl. I was the girl who stayed in the kitchen but didn't want to learn how to cook. Mostly I wanted to hear their conversation. I was the girl who interviewed the boyfriends and the partners of my aunties as a little girl. I was the one who was dressed up and given Easter speeches and ring curled to the T for all of the special occasions. And so my Black girlhood for me is everything. It's everything. It has impressed upon my heart and my spirit in ways that I do not know, and in ways that I am newly discovering as I mother little girls. As we celebrate first bead ups, first braided hairdos and Afro puffs and all of these things that are very central, I think, to Black girlhood, as we learn hand games and famous chants. I don't know, it's impossible to separate that experience for who I am from what I'm interested in academically and personally, and from how I mother. So this book is really important to me, and I feel like right on time, because Black girlhood for me, I never get tired of investigating that time, of recalling that time, even the challenging parts, right? And never get tired of investigating just how it has impacted me in all aspects of my life. And I feel like, Janaka, this is what you are doing. You wanted me to say something about how I came to writing, and I really think writing and reading Black women's work, and it was really because of all of these women in my lives who were reading, but were not intellectual, right? These women who were writing, but would never tell you that they were writers,
Right.
but who had so much power and so much magic that they gave me the courage, I think, to pick up the pen. So that's my intro. Janaka, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you've come to writing and how you've come to this project?
Absolutely. And I love that that's your grandmother's book, and thinking about whose words we're reading, but also whose books we're holding. And I can start out talking about myself as a reader, because I used to take my mother's books off the shelf, and I would take them to school. I know in the 7th grade, we could bring our own books on Fridays. And I don't know what other people were bringing, but I was bringing Toni Morrison, and I was bringing Terry McMillan, and, all kinds of books from my mother's shelf. And I kept some of them. I know she's like, I know I bought that book. I don't know where your books are. But, just thinking about how reading is a legacy too. And as I, just give a little context, I've always been a reader. I was, wearing glasses in the 2nd grade because I was reading under my covers. And, it was the thing, being one of 4 children, that they knew if I was reading, I wasn't in trouble. I wasn't bothering anybody. I'm also a middle child, so I just wasn't bothering anybody anyway. But, that was my safe space. I was away from my siblings. The books were mine. Nobody else, wanted them. Once I took them, nobody took them from me. My siblings like, well, she's over there reading. And so that was my safe place, and also my happy place in books. And so this book came from thinking about myself as a girl reader and also a girl writer in community. And I did the majority of this writing during, the height of the pandemic, also with my daughter, who is 9 now, but was, 6, 7 then, who was constantly telling me, like, play with me, Mom, like, play with me. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna play with you, and then we're gonna write together. And so there's a story in the book. The last speaker I hosted at UNC Charlotte as part of, I was then director of women's and gender studies. And we hosted Dr. Angela Davis in person in February of 2020. And I got to introduce her, which was just a powerful experience. And actually heard her speak last week in Minnesota for the first time live again since then. But my daughter got to meet her when we took her back to the airport. And my daughter, Delaney is her name, was asking me a bunch of questions. And I said, well, why don't you ask Dr. Davis? And so, she was a little shy. And the one question she said was, how did you feel when you found out about the 4 little girls dying? And because I had told her from, her autobiography that her mother knew and taught those little girls in her hometown in Birmingham. And even though Dr. Davis was away at college, she wrote about the impact of finding out that, not only did those murders happen, but it was in her hometown, it was in her community, it was people her family knew. And she talked about the numbers of bombings in Birmingham during that time, so much so that it was known as Bombingham. And so telling my daughter those stories at the same time, and her, getting to meet and ask, how did you feel? Because that was the piece that she picked up on. How did you feel when those little girls died? And so Delaney helped me start writing this book. And there were pieces and there were stories that were already present. But my question was, how do we talk about these moments in our history and in our presence? Because at the same time, we are watching the murder of George Floyd on TV as I'm writing. I'm from Augusta, Georgia, knowing, of Ahmaud Arbery coming out of Georgia, Breonna Taylor, and we're watching this news and we're talking about Black girls in stories, but also thinking about how do I feel with my Black girlhood self still inside, talking to a Black girl, my daughter, a Black boy, my son. And so we're reading in community to try to think through and figure out things, even while we're isolated during, the pandemic. And so, I mean, it was just this attempt to hold all of it as I wrote the story, and knowing that we can't hold it all, right? We can't hold it all. And as I am experiencing this attempt to try to write Black girlhood, I'm thinking of all of these authors, Assata Shakur, who's writing about growing up with her grandparents in Wilmington, North Carolina, which, not that far from me, and her grandparents living near Black Beach, Carolina Beach, and being able to say who could and who couldn't park in their parking lot in that space. And so thinking about what are these spaces that these young Black girls who become Black women activists get to see and get to experience that shape their light and shape their legacies. And so that's where the book came from, that came to be called Light and Legacies, Black Girlhood and Stories of Liberation. And so I was constantly thinking of this idea of what is the light, around those lives that were lost in 1963. What is our light today? What did these girls experience that allowed them to come and tell their stories? And so all that a long introduction to the project, but I wanted to say I really appreciate being invited into this messy conversation and back into this messy conversation. We were talking about anger before and rage and with, the commemorating Audre Lorde's life, she, wrote on the uses of anger, but I'm also thinking about, the messiness of girlhood in this conversation and sayings, people will say to Black women and Black girls, girl, you a mess. Or we say, we a whole mess, and sometimes a hot mess. But it was the messiness of these conversations that I was working through and not knowing what it would look like. And it ended up being part poetry, part reflection, part, narrative, and then also critical analysis. And so this book was a messy project that, and I don't know that I tried to clean it up. I let it be in experimental forms. And so I'll read a little bit later some of the pieces, the poetic narrative, and the text that inform that.
Thank you for that, Janaka. What a beautiful story about Delaney meeting Angela like that and thinking about the idea of legacy. Like, that's a legacy for her, mm-hmm. And maybe your job to remind her of that for many moons. But that is something that whatever answer she gave, that's Delaney's, like, her passing it on. And I appreciate that. Yeah.
She was like, I can't go to school. I got to tell my teachers I'm going with Dr. Angela Davis to the airport. And I'm like, yeah, sorry, we're going to miss school that day.
Yeah, it seems like that should be an excuse there. Thinking of yourself, Janaka, a little bit, tell me, when, how, what do you think you've learned about yourself from your own Black girlhood? Maybe a couple of big highlights.
Yeah. So, how stories come to you and you're like, why am I remembering that? And so even as recently as today, I was remembering he was the janitor, did facilities at my elementary school. I only went for one year to this school, and he would give me candy because I wasn't allowed to have candy at home. My mom had a few years where she was like, my kids are going to be so healthy. And then my younger siblings got whatever they wanted. And so I remember sharing that. And one time it's just like, you take these mystery mix now and laters. And they were my very favorite, favorite candies. So I learned these moments in spaces at school, at church, in the community, that Black girlhood was sweet. Like, there were, moments that were challenging, but I always felt like I was in community and surrounded by community. And I got to hear, these stories. You talked about your grandmother. My late grandmother was raised in South Georgia, Pelham, Georgia. Her family was a sharecropping family. They picked cotton, and she, grew up became educated, college educated as an adult parent of 2 children, and then wanted her own land. And she was like, it's not gonna be any cotton. It's like, it's gonna be mine. I can do whatever I want to. And so I learned about the power of Black womanhood through my girlhood self too, from these women who were like, you can't tell me what I can't have. I'm gonna figure out how to get it. And so I think I always grew up thinking, okay, I might need to figure out how to get it, but whatever it is, it can be gotten. It can be gotten. And so I find those stories in almost every story I read and I write about, even being from Georgia, and when Stacey Abrams declared that she was going to run again, the way that she shared her girlhood and her family story, where everybody in her family was like, yes, you do what you need to do. And so now, even with the way the election turned out, I'm like, we're just waiting for what's next. We're just waiting for the how and when. And so I think that was the biggest 2 lessons were the sweetness of girlhood, but then also this idea of whatever it is that you want, whatever you want to pursue, it can be gotten. It's just,
it can be gotten. I love that.
Yeah,
I love that.
It. And I have to remind myself that when, the 9-year-old's like, this is what I want. And I'm like, not right now. It's like, okay, when?
Right. It can be gotten. Right. And not shutting that down in her. Mm-hmm. I like this idea that the idea of it can be gotten too is so, I think, related to this idea of sort of like our mothers and grandmothers, like always being able to make something out of nothing, right? Mm-hmm. Always being able to produce when there was little, always having this magical creativity to take care of their families and to get what needed to be gotten, right? And that's
or
definitely
to say like, not right now. You can't have it right now, but
right. On my side, I have one grandmother who was a single mom, who had a very different experience growing up in the South. There's some mixed raceness on her side, and she was very light skinned and dealt with all of the issues related to that. And on the other side, my other grandmother was very dark skinned, very traditional, from the country outside of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, married my grandfather because my grandfather was in the Army. And so he got out and she wanted to get out. So it can be gotten. And I think love maybe came later, you know what I mean? But we had to make some ways out of no way. Do you remember what you dreamed about as a girl? Or what you dreamed for?
Yes. And so this is the interesting thing. I write the story of my 5th grade teacher, Victoria Rogers, who wasn't my first Black woman teacher, but was my favorite. I still, communicate with her. And I dreamed about being her. I wanted to stand in front of my own classroom and everybody loved me. And I just thought, I loved her. And still, she gives my kids money and candy. They love her too when we go visit. But I just wanted to be able to command that space. And it's funny because, I didn't even dream about, being a parent and being, playing with, kids. I wanted to be in a classroom and I wanted books. That's what I dreamed. That's what I dreamed. I thought she had the world with all the books on her shelf. And that's what I wanted to do.
And what do you dream about now?
I dream actually now, I think about the life that exists, the life I have. It's not, that like there's no more to come, but the people in my life, the communities, the, conversations, the sisterhoods, even when I was writing my dissertation and coming back to Chicago and, sleeping in your house, I dream about those connections continuing, which they have. And so, yeah, just for it to continue to grow, that's what I dream about. What about you? What do you dream about?
Well, let me ask you one last thing. Do you share those dreams with Delaney?
I
Both
do.
the dreams of it. Okay.
Yeah, and even with Justice, who's my 12-year-old, and so we have this thing with mugs in our house, mugs with sayings, and also T-shirts. I love it, T-shirt with sayings. And so the mug I got her last week before I went out of town says "Black Girl Grow," and it has flowers all over it. And so it's just this idea of dreaming of continuing to grow for her, for me, for all of us.
I don't know. I'd have to give maybe some teary thought to what I dreamt of as a girl. I knew for certain that I wanted out of the South. I felt very limited. As much as I love the women in my life, I felt that their options were very limited. And where I was someone who always knew I wanted, maybe some traditional things, a family, a partner, or whatever, I was very determined to do that on my own time and in my own way. And to this day, my story doesn't look like any of the women who reared me. And I kind of hold on to that as a source of pride. What I dream of now, I was getting ready for this presentation. If I had time or been more organized, I wanted to find some pictures. And in addition to this book and the many books you were talking about, stealing books from your mom's shelf, my mom will come to my house and be like, I think that's mine.
You like, prove it. And then she's like, that's
my signature in the front on the cover, on the cover page. But I was thinking about some pictures that are important to me. And one that actually popped up was one of my dad. The baby girls are into Cabbage Patch dolls. They've had a resurgence. And there's one of my dad sitting with me next to him, and he's rocking my Cabbage Patch doll. And the Cabbage Patch doll is Black. And I'm very intentional about seeking out representation of Black girls and women for my own children. And I think of that picture, and in my girls' room, there's a poster that my grandmother gave me many moons ago that she had framed when I graduated from middle school. And it's a poster of Maya Angelou's Phenomenal Woman. And it's this beautiful photo and all this really lovely African print artwork. And I just think about that in all the ways my family, both immediate and extended, were sort of giving me representations of myself. Like no matter what was happening in the world around us, no matter what was on TV, the books that we read were Black. You know what I mean? The models we talked about, the musicians we talked about. So it's like whatever the world gives you, you get. But as for us in this house, this is what we are going to share. And I feel very strongly about that for my own children. Even at their young ages, they can tell you some historical Black figures. They ask questions. My son is obsessed with Jackie Robinson, and I already see where they know. And as much as I dream of a world where like the limitations of race and color are lessened and not as much of a big deal, I also am very much proud of whatever that is that I feel like has been passed on to me, to make sure that they get it. You know what I mean? That they get it, that they see themselves over and over in all these facets of the world, and art and sports and academia, and that they get it, and that they're not thinking that whatever their dreams are, that they're impossible, because somebody has already paved the way for them in some way. And it's important for me to make sure that they recognize those legacies, whether they belong to our family or not. So anyway, that picture of my dad, I was like, this was really sweet. He was like reinforcing this thing for me, and there are tons of pictures of me, right at my mother's hips. I was obsessed with her. And I think I'm shocked at the ways that I see her in what I am currently doing. Like shocked in a way of like, oh, I wasn't supposed to carry that on. Darn it, there she is. You know what I mean? She's
popping up.
She's popping up. So And thinking about your work and thinking about the book, what do you think these stories of Black girlhood, what do they teach us about mentorship for Black girls and how that looks or how it should be happening sort of present day, in your opinion?
Yeah, I want to actually use, you talked about the Cabbage Patch doll, but my grandmother, as many others did, made dolls for their children, for my aunt, because she wasn't finding those. And so, even reading like Zora Neale Hurston, when she got down to Belgrade, Florida, she found somebody to make dolls. And so, this idea of, how we have mentored ourselves in practices and creativity is that lesson too. It's like, okay, if we don't find it, we're going to make it. If it's not being marketed, we're going to find it. And so I think that's the lesson of mentorship too, that it's often peer mentorship or family mentorship, or not those traditional ideas of like mentorship being offered to you or gotten to you. And so with girls too, we're teaching ourselves. It's somebody else that might be a little bit older or knows a little bit more, whether it's right or wrong. That's how we're learning. That's how I can think of many of the lessons I learned as a girl were from people who are slightly older than me, even when I couldn't have those conversations with my mother or with, other women. They were still getting passed down. So these lessons are always getting passed down. And we don't necessarily think of mentorship in community, but that's what's happening. We're always learning from each other. Last night, Michelle Obama talked about her new book, The Light We Carry, that's coming out. And I was like, light. I was like, I had already written, light. So it's just light all around. And so she had her mother and some of her friends at the table, and they were talking with Robin Roberts. And, her mom would try to answer questions, and Michelle Obama would be like, don't say that, like kind of pushing her away. But then her friends would say, things, and she's like, yeah. And so it's this idea of, mentorship within community, always being kind of what we do. And then I had mentioned to you that Alexis Pauline Gumbs wrote the essay and the book, We Can Learn to Mother Ourselves. And it's a collection, but I've always thought of this idea that like we can learn to sister ourselves. We can learn to, parent ourselves for those pieces that are missing. And so I think that works for mentorship too, because we find what we need when we know, that community is there. So I think that mentorship is often happening within community too. In these stories as well, The Bluest Eye, and that's my background. You can see it, The Bluest Eye, where you have, Pecola with Claudia and Frida McTeer, and, they are kind of teaching her about life, and they're not that much older than she is, but she is coming into their home because she's been, as Morrison Wright put, outdoors by her own family. And so this idea of Pecola coming into the McTeer home and being in community, they're mentoring her, even as they're like, what did we do? Oh, okay, so that's an example too, and there are lots of those in these stories.
Clarence, Clarence just asked a question, says, growing up in the South, did we feel seen, heard, and protected as a Black girl? Yeah. And I want to answer that question for him. And I think it's a really good segue for us to talk about the attack on Black girlhood. Mm-hmm. And that has been really seen in the last couple of years, thinking about Sandra Bland, thinking about Breonna Taylor. And I think the Sandra Bland situation, I felt like, and you tell me if you disagree, really hit home in the Black girl, Black woman community, because what we saw in the video, if you had the courage to watch it, was a Black woman who was not backing down from this authority figure, who, if you want to classify it as such, sure, was sassy, was angry, was however you want to judge it. But because our communication, because our style, because some of it is so different, and I think there's always this attempt to tame it, right? To shape it, to make it digestible and appropriate. And a lot of those conversations came up during that time, like why we're viewed differently in the workplace, why we're viewed differently at school, why Black girls are considered fast, right? I think there's also something like with body and the power of body, you know, in that discussion as well. So I don't know. I think I'm just saying, let's segue to that and talk about that a little bit and maybe how your book addresses that issue.
Yeah, I agreed. And to the question of feeling seen, heard, and protected as a Black girl in the 80s, I think I felt very different than, you know, those who came before me who were invested in my protection. And I'm, you know, one of 3 daughters, and my maternal grandmother had 4 daughters. And so there was always this idea of, you know, protection within the family structure, but that came from what they experienced of not being protected as Black girls. And so part of the legacy too is, you know, what gets passed down and what they could create for me to, you know, experience that protection that they didn't necessarily have. And you're absolutely right, thinking of Sandra Bland, these are all of the things that systems, including educational systems, try to tame, try to correct, try to restrict in Black girls. And so things like, as is written in the book Push Out, girls rolling their eyes is a disciplinary offense, or what happened in South Carolina, where the young woman was pinned down by the, you know, school resource officer for not putting up her phone. And so all of these attempts, you know, to regulate things that would not have been offensive by any other body, we often see, you know, in Black girlhood. And so there, you know, these things like attitude, right? And we all have an attitude about something. We all have we all have feelings, we all represent ourselves, but what are the behaviors that become threatening? And that's often written on and by Black girl bodies. And so, you know, that's a piece. It's just these ideas of like creating senses of threat where, you know, they're not there. And so even with all of the harm, the pain, the challenges of the pandemic, of the ongoing pandemic, it's even thinking about what are the safe spaces of, you know, Black girls not having to go into these spaces that try to regulate and threaten them. And that's a question I continue to ask. You know, what are some of the spaces that were safer outside of the systems, outside of the public eye? And, you know, how do we keep some of that going too? And even to connect your question, David, about reading in community and why it's important, what benefits come from it. Reading for me, as I said, was a safe space because it was me in my room, in my space. Nobody was bothering me. The outside wasn't coming in. I wasn't going out. And so it wasn't, you know, that threat of being harmed, but it was still being able to be in community through text. And so reading about, you know, Black girls in community, I mentioned The Bluest Eye, but in all of the books, in Assata, in Angela Davis, an autobiography, in Toni Cade's The Black Woman in Anthology, and The Salt Eaters, in Gorilla My Love, which has a lot of childhood and girlhood characters, they're always in community. They're in community with each other, they're in community with other people. And there's something about reading about Black girls in community that brings a sense of community for that reader who might be all alone, but knows that these worlds exist in books. And so, you know, even thinking about Reading Rainbow, take a look, it's in a book, you know, this idea that whatever you imagine and whatever you can't necessarily find in a physical sense is present in a community sense through these books.
I would add to that too. I would add to that too, books where I feel like a central theme is healing, right? And so, you know, not only are you reading and existing in community, but when I think of the Salt Eaters, the main line is that book, you know, is what? Are you ready to be healed? Are you ready?
Yes.
You know, are you ready?
Healing ain't no trifling matter.
No, it's not. You know, are you ready to dive deep to do this? And those examples of sisterhood over and over again, I feel like are also cemented, you know what I mean? Like in us and how we crave it as we continue on our journey. I don't know if I would say that I felt protected outside of my family. I think that I have a lot of examples that I can recall of always being compared to others. And then because I was smart and sort of categorized that way, then always being sort of alienated from larger populations as a representative of one of the good ones, so to speak, you know. And then when I came into teenagedom and got a little sassy and finessed my neck roll and my eye roll, then all of a sudden, you know, you're downgraded again. You know what I mean? So I think my family unit did the best that they could to protect, but the outside world wasn't necessarily so kind in some of the spaces that I was in for school. Yeah, I think that's how I would answer that question, Clarence. And forgive me, I know the chat is popping off. Am I supposed to be following?
I'm watching it, and I'll jump in with anything that you miss. I just put a question for you both in the chat just now, but it looks like you've kept up with all of them so far. So
I do want to talk about the children's books.
Go for it.
Yeah. So my first book, and I write about this in the book too, the first book with a Black girl on the cover that I got that was all my own was Nikki Giovanni's Spin a Soft Black Song. And it still, you know, circulates. Gwendolyn Brooks, A Street in Bronzeville, Faith Ringgold, I know, does the art for Harriet's Underground Railroad. There are some books. May Among the Stars is a great one. And so Hidden Figures, the picture version, and I have a list actually in my book as well of, you know, these books. And now my little one is like, I'm too big for picture books, and I'm like, I'm not too big for picture books. And so, you know, there's the pictures and the art being so powerful, but those are a few. And yeah, to circulate a list would be awesome. Yeah. And so that's another powerful moment, right? Thinking about this generation that, you know, will know Hidden Figures, will know Mae Jemison, will know, you know, the mathematicians, and you know, even in Hidden Figures, where the author writes, I always knew Black women mathematicians who worked for NASA. Like, everybody knew, they weren't hidden to me. And so, you know, this idea with this generation having access to even more than we did in terms of what exists. And I wrote three children's books. So the first one was Brown All Over, and it was when my son discovered he was brown all over. And so that idea. And then the second one, Bo Nia Marie Passes the Test, is about, that's a good one, is about a little girl who gets the confidence from her community to pass a test. And we hear all these you know, stories about Black girls being challenged in math and science, and instead, you know, the narrative is like, no, we just have different stories sometimes. And so, you know, that inspiration there too. And yeah, the Little Legends and Dreamers books are awesome. Yeah, those are both great.
And I would throw in there too, like, I've been really happy to see the movement toward there being children's books that have Black spaces in them, because Black children love cats and dogs and nature and walk, you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't always have to be a historical lesson. Like, I just appreciate that there's a new awareness, like, they exist, they should be painted on the page. Yeah. So I have lots, Kat, as you can imagine. So maybe Janaka and we could work on a list and share that with the Messy Conversation folks and pass that along. Yeah.
There's a question. I want to do thinking about the relationship between experiences and scholarship, advice for students navigating and writing between their experience and the knowing of scholarship. Can I jump in with that?
Go for it, yeah.
Autoethnography is a thing. Writing about ourselves is a thing, and that's why I tell my students, start with yourself, because that's who you know, and use that as your lens onto the world and whatever you see. That's what's going to shape that lens. We've been taught that that's not scholarship, but I'm like, it is, because someone else will come and study you and call it scholarship. So, be the center, be the voice of that. And I'm teaching right now a Black feminist literary archives class. And I ask my students questions like, if you don't start with, white male critic X, how does the story change? What if you take that out? But I can't take that out. I have to show I know. What if I assume you know a lot of things and that you don't have to start with that? What if you start with your lens? How does the story change? And reshaping in that way. But that's a great question. Experience is knowledge. Yeah.
I was going to say, I counted one of my biggest blessings that for my freshman literature class, I got an African-American woman. And the very first thing that we read in there was The Bluest Eye. And it really shifted for me, like I don't have to go back through Shakespeare and Plato and then all the people I had done my AP, high school, blah, blah, blah.
Like I know it. Good.
Check. I was so tired of it. Yeah. And to have a course that centered Black women writers, Black writers in general, and lots of Black women writers was transformational for me. I think it was, speaking of just knowing that you could do it that way, was life-changing and probably kept me in college, honestly.
Absolutely. And knowing those stories of those who came before us too. I was my first theory class in grad school was a Black feminist literary theory class, and we read Patricia Hill Collins talking about her grandmother's theory, right? And how it's like, oh, it might not be documented in the same way as others, but that's where I got my knowing from. And so I'm always thinking about, what is that table knowledge? What is that, that knowledge in the yard or in the house that is what shapes, not only what I do, but who I am. And that's the knowledge, that's the knowledge that matters. I love that question.
Any other questions floating around? Go ahead, Janaka.
I want to think about this question of healing, and then read a little bit, if that's okay. So I was thinking about this question of how Black girlhood demands healing, and how we heal as Black girls, what we need to heal, and who needs to be in the village. And so for me and for many of us, it's constantly thinking about how do we heal. During the ongoing pandemic, it was thinking about how do we heal. And then I lost last fall, October 2021, one of my girlhood friends to COVID. She was a mother. She was 41. And so I dedicated the book to her with this poem. And I wrote the poem. It says, "We was girls once, and we played, like really truly played, softball, basketball, and as the boys remember, a game called Get Like Me. You were loud as hell, and nobody better piss you off. Your mouth out-talked your game. I always thought that the smallest ones in height, although large in presence, needed to be heard the most." And she was short. I'm tall, about 5'10". But constantly, we're healing, but we're learning to heal ourselves from whatever our childhoods looked like, from whatever is happening in community. And these books taught me to ask the question, what we need and who we need, and to say we need. Because that's a piece too, not even being able to say, we need something different than what we see, than what we have. And I wanted to focus on this idea of not just the light, but the legacies that teach us that asking for what we need is not only okay, but is our means of survival. And, even to get to thriving. And so thinking about who needs to be in the village, it wasn't just, people who were physically present, but it was the women in these books too. And I'm gonna read a little bit from the beginning, the prologue, which is called The Gift. Where it all began. In first grade, in the mid-1980s, in my childhood hometown of Augusta, Georgia, I won a poetry contest where every poem each student memorized earned a dot on a bright red paper ladybug with our names. The person with the most dots at the end was the winner and got a poetry book, a whole book just for them. I had started memorizing Shel Silverstein poems with my best friend from kindergarten already. We would recite them during afternoon conversations on our parents' landline phones. So I was ahead to start, and I won by one dot on a ladybug after a close finish, I think, or at least it makes for a better story. My teacher, Mrs. Parker, a gray-haired, then seemingly much older white woman from Lexington, Kentucky, gave me Nikki Giovanni's Spin a Soft Black Song as the prize. I still don't know whether she picked it out before I won or had an option of books to choose from, as any teacher should, or if she just decided that whoever won should have that book. But whatever the case, it was a gift. As a middle child of 3 girls and later a baby brother, I didn't have a lot of things that were just mine. I did have my own room located between my sister's and my parents' room with a twin bed and colorful boxes on 3 walls and another wall that was bright yellow like sunshine. I remember trips to the store to choose wallpaper, though I do not remember if the boxes were already on the wall when we moved in. I could look through my windows at the yard outside, and there was also yard out back. I went to school in the middle, behind my sister, who was 1 grade ahead and ahead of the baby girl, who was not always the youngest, but called the baby girl for most of her life because she wouldn't leave my mother's side. I had many of my own possessions then. For a child born in the 1980s, it was also a gift to always have dolls, toys, and book characters that looked like me. Books belonged to the family. Spin a Soft Black Song, however, was my book, my gift, that let me know that not only did I matter, which I already knew, my family let me know that I was born for whatever success I determined, but that others knew that Black children mattered too. In the prologue, Giovanni wrote, I seek the courage of a boy who could go into the temple to assail the knowledge of the elders, the confidence of a man to pronounce the earth a satellite of the sun, the curiosity of a woman to see not only those aspects unseen, but those unseeable. I shared the desire to plan a masthead for doves, to spin a soft black song, to waltz with the children to the mountains of our dreams. And as I attend as many of Giovanni's live talks as I can, which now I know, LaCoya, we have in common, I've heard her say similar things about what men are able to do. Even as she wrote her famous poem, Ego Tripping, There Must Be a Reason Why, as a response. Here, however, she offers that the curiosity of women enable us to not only see, as she says, those aspects unseen, but those unseeable. We have to see each other as Black women and Black girls in community, in all our complexities, in order to see our children and to dance together. And the soft Black song, not the hardness dictated upon us in our lives, is the goal we want to achieve. I write this book as a remembrance for the lives of Black girlhood lived and living, but also as a requiem for the lives of the little Black girls lost in Birmingham in 1963, where my telling of Black girlhood stories began in a summer class that followed my 8th grade year, but also before and throughout my entire life. I also write of the activism that has created spaces for Black girls to move, to breathe, to live. From Harriet Jacobs and Elizabeth Keckley in the 1860s, to Charlotte Hawkins Brown in 1940, to Angela Davis from the 1960s through today, to Toni Morrison, and even recently to Angie Thomas, who wrote The Hate U Give, and also on the come up. Through fiction and Monique Morris's agency through telling the real lived stories of Black girls whom society deems unmanageable, but in whom they find the tremendous joy that we know exists. And then I talk about a number of books that create these spaces about Black girlhood. Kyra Gaunt's The Games Black Girls Play, Learning the Ropes from Double Dutch to Hip Hop, Ruth Nicole Brown's Black Girlhood Celebration toward a Hip Hop Feminist Pedagogy, Amy Meredith Cox's Shapeshifters, Black Girls in the Choreography of Citizenship, and there are a number of books. Bettina Love's Hip Hop's Little Sisters, and We Want to Do More Than Survive, Monique Morris's Sing a Rhythm, Dance a Blues, and also Push Out. And so these conversations are shaping the ways we think about Black girls as disciplined, but also the spaces are moving through games, through dance, through music. And so I wanted to think about how we hold the stories of violence and the stories of trauma, but also how we hold the stories of movement and the stories of light that come through their stories. And so that's what I was thinking about with the book. Who are the women who are telling their girlhood stories? Who are the stories we need to continue to think about, and how the Black girlhood stories are present in so many texts, from Phyllis Wheatley writing about herself and her memories, and coming from Africa to America, and when she reflects on herself as an Ethiopian, she's thinking about her Black girlhood self in her writing. When Toni Morrison illustrates what could never actually be the bluest eye, we have these ideas of trying to reclaim space, reclaim humanity, reclaim self-love through Black girlhood stories. And so I write, their stories of Black girlhood were, are, and will be lights that continue to shine from even the darkest places. And so through the book, I try to think about how each of these authors, Morrison, Assata Shakur, Angela Davis, and others are thinking about the darkness in their lives, but where light comes from. And Nina Simone is another who I look at from North Carolina, from Tryon, North Carolina. And, this is a familiar line: to be young, gifted, and Black, that's where it's at. But knowing her story of being trained and wanting to be a classical pianist, and then, always being expected to play a different type of music than she wanted. And she says in the documentary, I lived in the South, for 17 years. And she said, it was always a matter of necessity from day to day what I had to do. I never thought about a choice. And so that's another piece to hold. Who didn't get to live the lives, even as great as she was, and as everybody thought she was, not getting to do the things she wanted to do, wanting to be a recognized classical pianist, and having that in conversation with, the four little girls, and also thinking about her singing Mississippi Goddamn, and she changed the lyrics specifically for the Selma march. She changed it to Alabama's Got Me So Upset. Selma made me lose my rest, in this idea of, everybody knows about Mississippi Goddamn, everybody knows about Alabama, everybody knows about all of these Southern spaces that are taking lives and having that impact. And so that, at the same time as, to be young, gifted, and Black, that's where it's at. They're at the same time, right? They're at the same time, and they're holding the same space. And so it's both the light and these legacies of darkness that are informing and shaping all of these stories. And so when Simone sings, I wish I knew how it would feel to be free, I think that's what a lot of these authors are thinking about. What does freedom look like? What does imagination, what does creativity look like? And if it's not fully present where they are, they can create it through their stories. And it's not just starting in the 20th century. I write about Frances Ellen Watkins Harper's Iola Leroy in the 1890s, where she has a fictional character, Iola, who is like, what do I want to do with my freedom? Do I want to get married? Do I want to be a teacher? Do I want to do all of the above? And some of these things were reality at that point, but it wasn't an idea that freedom was fully realized. And so just thinking about what is the narrative that they want to see. And that's what these texts are doing. So from the bluest eye, where, blue eyes are something that are imagined so that Pecola Breelove doesn't have to see the ugly of her life. Or Sula, Toni Morrison's text, thinking about, I asked this question, was Sula sweet? Because, she certainly lived many aspects of the life she wanted to live, but wasn't thought of as necessarily a sweet girl, right? What does it mean to be sweet as a girl? To a number of other narratives, even thinking about Alice Walker's The Color Purple, and what did Celie dream of in her narrative when she had to get married as a young girl, when she had to help raise kids, where she experienced sexual and physical violence, right? But then as that text goes on, finds her own place through Shug, but also on her own, away from, these experiences of being a parent and being a spouse, but decides to make pants and become an entrepreneur and, create her own story. And so Girlhood Dreams are a part of that too. And just, one more piece and we'll talk too. I write these novels and memoirs of Black power written by women writers, which also go back to their childhoods, represent both cultural representations and fictional production to ultimately realize how moments of tragedy and resistance were presented by the media, but responded to in very deeply personal ways by the authors. Black girls help them learn about the world around them through media. And so they think about loss, they think about emotional, spiritual, and physical violence, but then they also think about play, they think about dreams, they think about movement, they think about joy. And all of these texts allow us, ask of us, demand us to do the same thing. And so that's where I want to pause with the book, and I can talk about all the texts, at length. I'll throw in Sapphire's Push, even thinking about what reading and community brings for Precious, and how that's a narrative in itself. And then I end with Black Girlhood, a chapter called Build from Black Girl Magic to Afro Futures. And so I think about Shuri in Black Panther and Wakanda Forever, and we promise, no spoiler alerts, but, just thinking about what Shuri made possible fictionally, but, what Black girls are always making possible in real life, and how that's a moment to think of too. So I'll pause there and we can think about more questions or whatever you want to do.
Yeah, thank you. We passed the 5 o'clock mark. I know some people have already left us, and we'll continue as long as our panelists would like to and can and are able to. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing, especially all of these very personal stories of yours. I couldn't help but just think of the number of choices, options, roles, and opportunities that you're talking about from start to finish today, and how that modeling is really so valuable, especially with kids. But I am finding in my adult life sometimes even more important. And I wonder, from the two of you, your experiences in your professional adult life, how do some of these stories or these roles come into play in some of these difficult dynamics that can help us?
Yeah, I think for me, I'm always going back to the Black girlhood self and what she would have wanted, whether, she got it or not, and thinking, that shapes what's still possible, and not necessarily having to see a model, but, okay, well, I can make the dream real. And that came from, my 4'11" grandmother who decided she was going to go to college with an 8-year-old and a 9-year-old while my grandfather was fighting overseas. And she was in Albany, Georgia, which, Martin Luther King called one of the worst places, if not the worst place for racism in America. And she walked my father and my aunt to see him because she wouldn't let them ride on segregated buses and they didn't have a car. And so, learning those lessons, and that came down always through my dad. And he was like, I just wondered, I'm like, please, can we get on the bus? And my grandma's like, no, you are not riding at the back of anybody's bus. And so, just thinking again about, how the stories make possible what we want to see, even if we don't see it already. That's something I always go back to. What about you? Oh, yeah.
I don't know. I think I'll pass on that one. I feel so saturated right now in motherhood. I think it's kind of hard to see my way through sometimes. And so I feel like I'm in a space of like passing on because perhaps I feel like I can't right now. But I think the biggest legacy for me is the understanding that this time is a moment, and this feeling of like, I will always fight for myself, get back to myself, even if I veer off some track or if I have to take some necessary pause. And I know that is nothing but my grandparents and my grandmother's at play. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think you can accomplish the things my grandmother did. She basically raised 7 children by herself while my grandfather was overseas, and then my other grandmother raised 2 boys pretty much by herself in the city where Martin Luther King was killed, and talked a lot about that history or that event and how that then shaped and changed her motherhood. So I don't know right now. I don't know if I have a concrete answer to that one, Sarah Beth, other than I'm holding on. I'm standing still in the moment, maybe.
And there's always an evolving self too.
Say that again, Janaka.
So I feel like there's always an evolving self too.
Right.
Like, get back to what? If this is new self, like what this new self gonna do?
That's true.
Yeah.
Sorry, we should have clarified the time. For some reason, we were thinking we went till 5:15. Okay. I see people dropping off. Apologies.
It's okay. I think people just don't want to interrupt you because it's so beautiful. I appreciate your sharing so much. Also, I think a lot of these examples take resourcefulness to many new levels. And, what you're both speaking about is just so complex, but I really was caught by the number of roles and options, and that being at choice, I feel like is so important when we talk about healing. Yeah. I think Asa, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I did want to ask you a question. I don't mean to get too like in the weeds with a specific text, especially one you haven't even mentioned yet, but I'm guessing based on the class you mentioned you're teaching, if you touched on Sadia Hartman and like Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments, and that idea. Yeah, because
her whole body of work.
And so I was wondering if you can speak to that at all, or if how you see her work like in this picture.
Yes. And so that's a great question. So I think about, not only scenes of subjection with like the discipline of bodies moving, in the institution of slavery, but with Wayward Lives, I love reading the narratives of these women who, went north for various experiences, and then the experiences they had in, the city were different from maybe what they imagined. But I think about that book as like, what are the real stories, and what did these women do to create their own dreams? And so it's this idea of what might be ugly, but as they worked out what life looks like. And I think that goes back to the dream piece too. Sometimes what they dreamed of was not the reality, but always the ability to dream and to create spaces. And so Hartman definitely informs all of my work, but in that piece specifically thinking about what are these dreams. I appreciate that question.
Janaka, I'm thinking this intersection of the history and legacies. How are you integrating that into not only your teaching but your work as director of the Institute of the New South? I'm always fascinated about the space New South. So enlighten me.
That's a good question. And so, I argue that the New South is very much the Old South with a different name, right? And so, the New South is terminology that's supposed to think like post, civil rights and progressive movement. And Charlotte, and I write about in the book too, the narrative of Dorothy Counts-Scoggins, who, was integrating Harding High, and we had these visual images of her being attacked and things thrown at her. And James Baldwin talks about seeing that, in the media, even being outside of the United States, and thinking we should be there for her. And this is in Charlotte, in the New South, so I'm like, we're not buying this notion of the New South being something that's completely separate. So in my work as the center director, we focus on race, gender, and ethnicity in history, in our stories, and point to these moments. And I have been doing a lot of work around, Brown versus Board of Education and what it did not make real for those in Charlotte and for those in a number of cities where they said, we're just gonna fill in the swimming pool. We're just gonna, close the school. We're just gonna start these, private schools in the same area so the kids won't have to go, to school together. And I use those to think about this idea that New South is a loose title for, what we need to explore further. So that's very much been a part of our work, and also not what everybody necessarily imagined the center would do. So there are a lot of different conversations, but I'm like, from this place, we will look at what, equity, what progress actually looks like, where it needs to be realized in, housing, in education, and what those narratives, are, but also what they need to be. So still waiting for the new, but doing that work in the meantime. I appreciate that question.
Mm.
And we also have the living legacies to still tell the stories, too. And, Dorothy Counts is a great narrative too. She still goes around speaking, but her parents pulled her out of Harding High School and they sent her to Asheville to the Allen School, which was a Black girls boarding school, to finish her education. And then she came back to Charlotte, to Johnson C. Smith, now University, so that, she would be educated surrounding it in community. And so that's a interesting, narrative too, what were parents doing in response to, those threats of violence, those who left their children enrolled in schools and created other spaces to protect them, and those who created different stories. So one book I'm grabbing that I write about is The Promise of Change, One Girl's Story in the Fight for School Equality. And it's Joanne Allen Boyce, who was in near Knoxville and integrated schools there too. And she was writing about, what was pleasant about her Black school and how she didn't, necessarily want to go. And she talks about what people say about Clinton, her town, and the segregation there, but what was good about being in community too. So that's a lot of what we've been exploring through the center, what it means to look at the South honestly, and without, these titles that seek to erase in order to give us these kind of narratives of progress.
I know I was thinking, and we don't want to keep you all too long, as I know it's 8 o'clock, so where you are. When I first read the title of your new book, I thought about Nikki Giovanni's, one of their pieces, one of my favorites, and she's a Gemini like David. And her piece was Those Who Ride the Night Wind. And I just really want to pay tribute to you for making this contribution, because there's a lot of those sisters who wrote Night Wind. So, and you're helping us, serving as a catalyst so we can learn more. And so, really, thank you. We're looking forward. We're going to be on the train getting that book out there for you.
Well, I hope to do an event out there in person once it's out, and that would be awesome. Yes.
JB,
You know,
I think that
Janaka,
oh, go ahead, Clarence. Go ahead.
I was just going to say your point about Charlotte and those pre-post New South days.
Mhm.
I go to
Mhm.
Charlotte often, and I'm glad to know you're there. So we
Yes,
hopefully
let me know.
LaCoya will connect us in a future date. But
Absolutely.
my friends who have been there for a long time, they want to tell me the history of Charlotte was that because it was a financial center, that the powers that be, the white supremacy, pulled in the Black leadership to protect the city from having demonstrations, from having a lot of outbursts racially, as it were. And hearing you say those two situations, it's like that's all lies. They just kind of shielded the world from really knowing what was going on. And of course, pre-George Floyd, we saw that in the incidents that happened with the police brutality in Charlotte.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting to hear you say that your take on the New South is what it is. And I'm excited to learn more about that because I'm from North Carolina and I'm from Wilmington.
Mhm.
And
Those histories.
yes, and Shakata was my cousin. I did not find out she was my cousin until she died when we were driving past her gated estate in Bladenboro, North Carolina. And so I was really upset because I come from a largely religious sector of Black folks. And so because she was a revolutionary and a Black Panther, they didn't want to talk about her. They shunned her. And I never knew she was a relative. So there are a lot of situations within our culture, within our communities, where we have shielded our history and the reality of that world. So like you're saying, there really isn't a New South. And I'm from Whiteville, North Carolina. I don't know if you know where that is, but it's 25 minutes or 30 minutes from Myrtle Beach. It's about 30 minutes from Wilmington. And just recently, the white sheriff, who's been sheriff for 4 years in that town, was secretly recorded, just like in our city here in Los Angeles. We had some politicians secretly recorded, and he was recorded saying, "I hate these niggas. I'm going to get rid of all of them." And they had several town hall meetings led by the NAACP. They forced him to resign, but his name was still on the ballot last week, and they re-elected this man. And it's like, how are you going to re-elect an avowed white supremacist
And then
in a
you know
town
how.
that's supposed to be progressing in the New South? It's amazing.
And then you know how it's absolutely the stories that are told and what's really going on, the behind the scenes that, at times is recorded. Yeah, I heard about that story. And then also people just wait till he gets back on the ballot. And that not being isolated incidents. But it
And I don't know
definitely
if you recall, I don't know if you recall in Charlotte a few years ago when they did have those incidents, the financial community came together, the Black members of the financial community, be it executives of Bank of America and Wells Fargo, they funded something called One Charlotte. I don't know if you recall that. I produced that huge event they had to kick that off. And it literally went into nothingness. It was like all an outside show. They did nothing to heal the community. They did nothing to uplift those people. They had no follow-up with programs and opportunities for the community they were talking about, uplifting. So there's a lot of stuff that's like window dressing and not seated in reality there.
And where does real change come from and what does it look like? But it goes back to, as you mentioned, the financial community saying we need the appearance of no violence. We need the appearance. So, also with the protests, this idea of what do we need to do to make it look good? And, what's the reality behind that? Thank you for sharing that, because it's still part of these conversations where people moving in are like, oh, this is what I see. Oh, looks like a great place. Let's keep it pushing. Meanwhile, Black communities have been, as in many cities, gentrified, erased, removed, and now people can't afford to be there. So these stories are what we have to go back to in writing to know that they existed.
So this does.
Oh, go ahead, David.
I'm out of line. This doesn't follow well on what Clarence just brought up, but I still want to get it out. Which is just now we've had the opportunity twice to be with the two of you, and you model friendship in such an extraordinary way, and then just the quality of the conversation, the intimacy, the vulnerability, the strength, the intelligence, all of it. It's just, I have to say, I think these are two of my favorite messy conversations. I could listen. I just want to eavesdrop on you both. So thank you for your generosity, both of you, in how you show up in this space. Really means a lot.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. I love this woman, and so it's easy. And I have a great deal of respect for the work that she's doing and just how she's been on this path for so long. And so I'm so proud of her and happy to try to showcase her whenever possible. So Elaine, let's talk about, once the book comes out, how we can kind of push that. And then I was going to say, as a follow-up, Janaka, maybe we can just start a sheet, you and I, of some of the books that you referenced tonight, and then as well as some of the children's lit books as well, authors' books, whatever we want to do. And maybe the MC team can push that out just as a takeaway from us. Because you mentioned quite a few books that I didn't even know. My reading ain't up to date these days. But,
look, you're doing a different type of reading. And I will say this is the quietest conversation we've had in years. But I love the energy.
Yeah, let's work on that though. And then maybe that can go on the website, Asa, or, just as a attachment handout from us to the community. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a Black Girlhood reading list in the back of the book. Right. And we'll definitely add the children's books.
Okay, perfect.
Too. Yeah, and thank you for having us in conversation. I mean, this is fun. this is so fun.
Full circle. I appreciate it so much. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you both so much for showing up today and sharing all of this with us. And I wish the best to you for your book launch. And I'm already got my orders placed. I can't wait to share it. And I hope that you'll keep us in mind as we
absolutely
as it unfolds for you. Yeah. And thank you so much, LaCoya.
Thank you.
Always.
Thank you all. All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you all so much.
All right.